All right, so we're here today to talk about an epic battle, the battle between human beings and reality. All right, so I'm Dr. Michael Berry. As you probably know by now, I'm a registered psychologist and I'm the clinical director of HBR. And like I said, today I want to talk to you about a concept that's pretty widely used in psychology and in the recovery field. In my experience, it's a really useful idea that can be applied to like a whole bunch of aspects of life, in particular, the things that cause us distress and emotional discomfort. The concept is called radical acceptance. Now, what I observe often in my work and at times in my own life is an attempt to resist or even deny reality. When things are upsetting, there's a pretty natural human tendency to want to avoid reality and bury our heads in the sand through denial, addiction, and a whole bunch of other defense mechanisms. Most of us have a pretty creative repertoire of things we do to deny or reject reality: escaping, lamenting, raging, and obsessing. Even daydreaming and fantasy can serve as a way to avoid reality or rewrite the past in our imagination. I think everyone I know has probably spent some time thinking and fantasizing about, what would I do if I could go back to high school knowing what I know now? I mean, I do this myself sometimes, and it can be a fun little thought experiment, but it can also be a way of trying to escape the disappointments and dissatisfaction that we experience in our day-to-day lives. We're kind of trying to recreate history in order to feel a bit better, even though we know it's just a fantasy. Another way we try to deny reality is to get angry, to kind of get pissed off about it. Sometimes we'll come up with schemes about how we'd get payback if someone has done us wrong, or how we'll reclaim a sense of power over something, like someone else's, perhaps like a friend, spouse, child, or a coworker's behavior. Even though obviously this is fundamentally outside our control. We can't control other people. And of course, there's addiction. Trying to escape and numb the mind through alcohol, drugs, other addictive behaviors. This is a way to try to get away from reality, fundamentally. It's an obvious form of non-acceptance. And what happens when you sober up? As you probably know, reality is still there. The basic idea here that's probably pretty obvious to many addicts is that the more we try to escape from reality, the harder it actually becomes. Let me ask you, what are some of the things and feelings that make you try to deny or reject reality? What are the elements of reality that you find hardest to accept? And what are the strategies that you use to escape or avoid reality? So there are a few ways out of this reality avoidance trap, and radical acceptance is one of the most powerful ones that I know. The techniques associated with radical acceptance come from what's called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. It's one of the strongest evidence-based psychotherapy models out there nowadays. DBT is all about dealing with difficult and overpowering emotions. One of the core practices in DBT is acceptance. So today, I want to describe and define the concept of radical acceptance. Then, I'll give you an example of a situation of acceptance versus non-acceptance. After that, I'll introduce you to an exercise that you can use to implement radical acceptance in your recovery, hopefully on a day-to-day basis. So, radical acceptance is about coming to terms with the circumstances of your life, well, like radically. Here, the word radical means absolute. Radical acceptance happens when you accept things totally and completely, with no exceptions. It's when you face reality as it is. It's when you finally stop fighting reality and come to terms with the fact that things, often aren't how you want them to be. It's when you let go of your bitterness and resistance in order to make room for actual healing. Now, this isn't to be confused with giving yourself or seeking approval, compassion, or even love. There's not any real positive or negative association to radical acceptance in itself, and it isn't intrinsically meant to be a comforting exercise, although in my experience, people always experience a really strong sense of relief when they do embrace a stance of radical acceptance. Now, I get it. At first glance, it might look unappealing. Why put in the effort to let go and accept things as they are when you could just as well put the blame on someone or something else, or engage in numbing, avoidant behavior? The answer is that accepting reality will help you build the foundation for long-term abstinence, and it will lead to long-term success and happiness over short-term avoidance. Your problems, as I said, are going to be there even after you finish avoiding them, so you might as well stop putting it off and deal with it head on. Now, there's a quote I really like from a really, really good book by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. The book is called The Body Keeps the Score. And the quote goes something like this: "The greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves." Take a minute. Let this sink in. The greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. At times, we all try to sugarcoat, reinterpret, reimagine things that have happened. But when it comes to truly moving forward from a difficult reality, we actually need to ground ourselves in the truth. You can't walk out of your current situation if you're floating away in denial. Now, again, I know this can be an uncomfortable thing to face, but being honest with yourself in the fact that you have or are rejecting reality is the very first step to correcting your perspective and then improving your situation. I'd like to take another moment to reflect on some of the lies you've told yourself when faced with a reality you weren't ready to accept. I want you to try to do this without judgment. Just acknowledge the facts as neutrally as possible. What behaviors have you used to try to deny or reject reality? What aspects of reality are you trying to deny right now? And how might you simply fully accept and radically accept these aspects of reality? How might that help you? I've got some good news. While accepting reality can be really difficult, it's actually through acceptance of reality that the possibility for changing reality becomes available to us. And that's what we're really after. We are trying to change our situation within the limits of what we can actually control. We can't change other people's thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. We can't change the past. But we can change our own thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and we can certainly change our future. Try thinking of radical acceptance as a way to gain control over yourself, as opposed to giving up or admitting defeat in the face of all the things that you cannot control. So, what are we accepting exactly? We're accepting that reality right now is as it is. The past and the present are facts. While the future is still open to modification, there are limits that we must be aware of and accept. Setting realistic expectations is key here. Now, We must also accept that everything, good and bad, has a cause and a meaning. For instance, negatives are needed in order for positives to exist. We're able to cherish and appreciate the good because we have bad things to compare it to. And accepting the fact that life can't just be filled with positives can honestly bring us peace when bad things happen. So, covering up or postponing the suffering really doesn't make it go away. Time can only heal you if you actually use it for healing and take the good with the bad. That's part of this healing work. Let me give you an example of a situation I've seen progress in a bunch of different ways. Breakups. Probably relatable for everybody. We'll use the example of Johnny, a hypothetical client whose wife has decided to leave him as a result of his long-term addiction to alcohol. He's experiencing what a lot of people do during a breakup. Pain, suffering, regret, shame, and difficulty accepting that this time it looks like she's really leaving for good. Now, Johnny has two options to choose from: the path of non-acceptance and the path of acceptance. The path of non-acceptance can look a little something like this. Johnny is suffering from a multitude of negative, uncomfortable emotions, and he wants to get rid of them. Picks up a glass, pours himself a stiff drink, and keeps drinking until the pain is numbed or until he blacks out. And honestly, it's actually debatable that Johnny's pain is even reduced through the drinking. I've had plenty of clients who go to a dark, dark place when they drink or use. They don't really feel any better at all. But they keep on using addictive behaviors as a means of trying to cope. And it's certainly a way of trying to escape from reality. In any case, when Johnny sobers up and all those things are still there, he encounters reality and he repeats the cycle. By doing so, he starts to worry those around him. He's engaging in self-destructive behaviors and he feels even more isolated and alone. He doesn't face his life circumstances and he continues to avoid the discomfort of his reality through more drinking. Things don't get better. So let's pretend for a minute that you are Johnny's recovery coach or addiction counselor. What do you think Johnny should do to deal with this situation? What advice, guidance, or wisdom would you offer him? So, Johnny's cycle may sound familiar to you. Maybe it's within a different context, but I can imagine you understand the train of thought going through Johnny's mind. I certainly do. Before I got a handle on my own addiction, I dealt with things in much the same way as Johnny, running into intoxication in a really futile attempt to avoid the realities that I didn't want to accept. And honestly, it didn't bring me any real comfort at all. I do want to make something clear here, though. Johnny's reasoning isn't bad per se. There is actually a logic behind it, even if that logic is pretty flawed. I think he's thinking, I feel bad, therefore I'll do things I know will make me feel better. The problem is that it is maladaptive, and while these behaviors might provide some short-term comfort, they really don't solve anything and may very well make things worse. My point is that you don't have to feel bad if you recognize yourself in Johnny, but you should be aware that if you want better for yourself, there are other options available for you to choose from, and they will actually garner you the results you want to achieve in the long run. What are some of the situations you found yourself in where you wanted to change your reality? What are some situations where you felt you faced and accepted the reality and coped with it well? what do you think would happen if Johnny chose the path of acceptance? Based on my experience, it could look a little something like this. So again, he's suffering from a multitude of negative, uncomfortable emotions that he wants to rid himself of. He is tempted to seek temporary relief from his suffering, but he knows it will be waiting for him the moment he sobers back up. So instead, he decides to acknowledge his feelings, as uncomfortable as they may be, and accepts that as much as he would like to, he cannot change the past, nor can he immediately change his current situation. The events that have led up to this moment are done. All he can do is work to build a future that he's satisfied with. He chooses not to heap blame on his wife or the other people in his life. He doesn't blame the universe for conspiring against him. He doesn't lash out and engage in self-destructive behaviors. He just spends some time sitting with his feelings in the reality he's in. He reflects on his current state, feels his emotions as they come up, and accepts that things just suck for now. He summons the strength to seek help and support, connecting with others, friends and peers perhaps, or maybe a coach or a counselor. The feelings are still unpleasant, but he reminds himself that things happened the way they happened, and that's that. His energy is better spent towards working on himself and his future instead of ruminating over things that he cannot change. He starts to work towards recovery, and he starts to become the version of himself that he actually wants to be. Try to remember this. The path is hard. It's like Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. By refusing to accept the misery that is part of climbing out of that hell, you're just going to fall right back in. Let's take another reflective moment. What are some things you need to accept? How do you think accepting these things would impact your life? Okay, now I want to turn towards the application part of radical acceptance and talk about some concrete steps you can take to implement this process when you need it. So first, you have to start with acknowledging the fact that you are fighting or rejecting reality. Try to catch yourself when you're telling yourself things like, it shouldn't be this way, it can't be this way, it must be different. And recognize that in this, you are engaging in non-acceptance. Once you've taken notice of your inner dialogue, start to remind yourself that the reality you are in, as I've said, is as it is, and it can't be changed immediately. Try replacing your "it can't be this way" with "this is what happened. It is how it is right now." Remember, you want to stay with the facts. Now you can start to dig a little deeper. Try to remind yourself that there are causes for the reality you're dealing with. Spend some time thinking about how you actually got to this point. And then, with the facts laid out in front of you, you can begin that process of accepting them. There are a few techniques you could use, like accepting and compassionate self-talk, deep breathing, mindfulness, or imagery, things we talk about in other sections of the HBR program. Right now, though, you want to proceed calmly and ease yourself into acceptance without judgment. This is about seeing things as they are, nothing more and nothing less. It's not the time to beat yourself up over things that have already passed. Now, by this point, you may not have accepted all the facts, but you're at least starting to be open to it. Try to think of all the behaviors now that you'd engage in if you did accept the facts. What would that look like? Maybe you would call someone you trust to talk it out, go seek some professional help, or even cut ties with someone who is enabling you or holding you back. Then you're going to engage in the behaviors you listed, as if you've already accepted the facts. It's certainly possible that you'll need the age-old trick, fake it till you make it. So remember, you're going to have setbacks, and that's a normal thing. When you feel yourself drifting back into unacceptance, take note of the thoughts and emotions that are going through you. Remind yourself that this will pass and that you just need to ride it out and face it. And be kind to yourself. Allow room for disappointment, sadness, or whatever feelings come your way. This process isn't supposed to be easy, but as I usually say, real change comes at the price of discomfort, at least for a while. If you're noticing that you're resisting the practice of radical acceptance, you can try doing a pros and cons list about what would happen if you accepted reality. Write it down, pen to paper. That can really help put things into perspective. And here's some questions you can reflect on, which will help you build that pros and cons list. What would you gain from radical acceptance in the short term? What would you gain in the long term? How would accepting or not accepting contribute to your goal of abstinence? How would accepting or not accepting impact your relationships with others? What are you risking with the path of acceptance or the path of non-acceptance? Sometimes having a visual representation of how much you'd benefit from accepting can help give you that extra push. Before I finish this session, I do want to share with you something from one of my very favorite authors, Dale Carnegie, who wrote a really, really good book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. In this book, he provides a rule that is an interesting take on the concept of radical acceptance when we're falling into the pattern of worrying about future events. He calls it the magic formula for solving worry problems, and there's 3 steps. Number 1, ask yourself, what is the worst that can possibly happen? Number 2, prepare to accept it if you have to. And then number 3, calmly proceed to improve on the worst. I find it important to reemphasize that acceptance isn't meant to be easy. It can often come with a lot of emotional discomfort, but it's really important to remind yourself that emotional distress is temporary, it's normal, it's survivable. I talk more about this in the videos on distress tolerance, but for now I want you to try to remember that radical acceptance is the process of throwing away the shovel so that you can stop digging yourself into a deeper hole than you're already in. Face reality as it is, without judgment, and then we can keep laying down the groundwork needed for you to make your full recovery.